Welcome to the Excel Pod. Welcome to Season 3 of the Untied Podcast, where we unravel the knots of life with faith, wisdom, and encouragement, because together we're here to untie from tradition and embrace truth through powerful Bible teaching. My name is Garrett and Bernethy. I'm one of the hosts of this show, and I'm here with one of my very good friends, Corey Sawyers. Corey, how in the world are you doing today?
I'm doing good and glad to be back.
Yeah, it feels like it's been a really long break, even though summer went by super fast.
Yeah.
But I'm glad to be back on here. And for all of those who are viewing this via either Excel TV or YouTube, probably noticed that we're one short. Tyler is not on here. Tyler is actually not going to be able to be with us this season. He is in the process of getting ready for an addition for his family, and we're really excited about that. And he had some other things that were going on that just prohibited him from being with us. And so we look forward to hopefully having him back on here, joining us for Season 4. But this season, it's going to be me and Corey, and we're going to have a lot of fun. We're going to talk about a lot of things, and I'm looking forward to it. So, Corey, let's get this thing started off right, man. What has been cooking?
Well, lots of things this summer, of course, but we've had a hot and dry summer, so I haven't done as much outdoor cooking as I have typically been doing. It's just now getting to, I'm sure it's about the same in Oklahoma, but actually I think y'all have gotten some rain that we've thought was heading to us, and about the time it got to the Mississippi River, it shot north or shot south. But
yeah,
anyway, I haven't been doing as much cooking outside as I normally have done. But now that we're finally, I think we're in a false fall right now. I think there's still probably another shot of heat coming at some point. But I've got plans at least this weekend to try to pull out the smoker and maybe do some jalapeno poppers and that type of thing for the ball game. So
Yeah, I haven't been doing much cooking either, but outside we've done a few things this summer, but we have had an abnormally wet summer overall, but the last several weeks have been super hot, just brutal. But we've been pretty fortunate over this last week for things to cool down and got some rain and much needed rain, and that's been good. So. I'm just excited. Go ahead.
I was going to say one of the things we do every year, our local university here at the University of Tennessee at Martin, we feed the football team. Of course, they come back to campus and begin fall practice, and the cafeteria and whatnot is not up and running yet. So they have, they try to get businesses and, clubs like the Rotary clubs and that kind of thing to feed them a meal. But most of their meals, they, end up doing like pizza or hot dogs or, whatever. So we try to give them a home cooked meal, and all the ladies of the congregation make sides. And then me and about, 6 or 7 other guys, we grilled about 500 pounds of meat. There's about 125 or so coaches and players and everything. So we cook tenderloin, we cook chicken breasts, boneless chicken breasts, and then we cook a whole lot of kielbasa. And but of course, the Saturday we did that was like 99 degrees with about 99% humidity and heat index of about 117. They're telling people don't be doing anything outside to get you overheated. And we have 3 big grills that I'm going bouncing back and forth between. But that was probably the biggest cooking that we did.
Yeah.
In the off season here.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty cool that you guys do that. We don't have a college here in Hydro. It's a pretty small town, but we have been pretty fortunate to be able to feed the teachers every year as they get ready for school, and we fed the baseball team the other day before a game, so that was all really good, and so cooked them a bunch of burgers, and it was really hot that day whenever I was doing that, and I thought, man, I don't know if I'm going to make it, so I cut it pretty close to when they showed up to when time the burgers were done, but luckily everything got done. We have some really good folks here that are always on board to help feed, whenever we do stuff like that. And that's always a good thing good community outreach and good way to be a part of things. So it's always awesome that you're able to do that.
Yeah. It's one of those things you never know how, we're not expecting to convert the whole football team next week, but it's just one of those things. Do a good deed and plant a seed, and you never know. You never go wrong by doing good deeds. So
that's right. That's right. Speaking of football, it is football season, and in my opinion, and I know it is your humble opinion as well, this is the best time of year.
Amen.
You have football. It's good cooking season. And you have hunting season that is here. Dove season started here in Oklahoma. And so that means that deer season is right around the corner and cool weather is right around the corner. And so this is my favorite time of year.
Mine too.
Yeah. So just watching football as much as I can is always a good thing. We watch so much baseball with the boys and basketball, and I love watching them play. But man, I miss football, and it's just really good to watch. So there was some really good games going on this weekend.
Yeah.
Starting off on Thursday night, there were some good games going, and we were talking about before we started recording the Texas-Ohio State game and Tennessee game, the Oklahoma game. There's so many that were on this weekend. It really was a great weekend to watch football.
Yeah. Yeah, I tried to make sure that I had all of my duties taken care of by Friday afternoon so that starting Saturday morning I could just sit on the couch and only thing I really got up for was to go to the kitchen and grab some more cheese dip or something, and
those are excused absences right there.
Yeah. So I just watched as many football games I could and football related before they got started, the college game day and Corso's last pick and all that. And it's good to be back to those kinds of things in the Burr months.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There were some really good plays this weekend. There were some unbelievable plays this weekend. I know during the Oklahoma game it was like this was a weekend of one-handed catches.
Yeah.
So Oklahoma is one of those. I guess that was probably the first one that I actually saw. And during our game against Illinois State, and we had a guy up on the sideline, and he did a one-handed catch. It was awesome. And then there was another one that was, it was
Florida
during the Notre
receiver.
game.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think who in the world Notre Dame played now. I've just gone blank.
They play Miami.
Miami, yeah, that's right. So I think it was a Miami player that had that one-handed catch. I believe it was in the end zone. And they tried to review it and call it back, but it was clear that he caught that. That was unbelievable.
Yeah.
So
the Florida receiver catch, as much as I hate giving the Gators credit for anything, but the Florida wide receiver that was falling backwards and reached back and caught it one-handed. And then I saw yesterday somewhere a picture of him from the other sideline. They had zoomed in, and he was like this, but you could see his eyes were turned to the right, and he watched that ball all the way into his hand. It was pretty cool to, see the athleticism and whatnot. But
yeah, I wonder if that's just a sign for how the rest of the year is going to go. These star moments, and we've got some big games ahead.
Yeah.
So
we've actually got a player on our team named Star.
No kidding.
Yeah, he's a running back named Star Thomas.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. There's some crazy names in football right now. In fact, I saw a picture, an image of some names, and we may have talked about this before. I don't know, but it was all the crazy names that are out there, and some of them are borderline inappropriate, but pretty cool with all the crazy names. But
yeah, I saw an all name team the other day that had some really cool names on it. Guys that like a wide receiver for, I think, Purdue that's first name is Nitro. Like, you want a wide receiver whose first name is Nitro, There was one dude that's name was like, I think he was a lineman. His name was Legend, was his first name.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and stuff like that. But
we had one at Oklahoma. His first name was General.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, his last name though was Booty. His name was General Booty. No kidding. And
that sounds like somebody that lost a battle in the Civil War or something.
Well, he came out of high school and was pretty, I don't remember how many stars he had or whatnot, but he was a pretty high recruited guy. But we had, that we at Oklahoma, we have had some really, really good quarterbacks over the last 10 years. And that's when he got there. And so I think that I may have this wrong, but he was there toward, somewhere between Baker, Kyler, and, the next few quarterbacks, that Jalen Hurts, he was kind of in that, and then just after, somewhere in there. And so there was no way that he was going to play. But he actually, he made some shirts that kind of played off of his last name, and I think made some good. He played the Boz card, and made some shirts that people would buy that they thought they were making fun of, but he was really getting the better of them. So,
yeah. Here's some of the names from the college football all name team for 2025. The quarterback's first name is God's Power. Godspower, all one word.
Wow.
Running back for the Montana Grizzlies, Tommy Running Rabbit. Good name for, one of the offensive linemen's name is Crush Sawyers.
Wow.
Sawyers or whatever. Another offensive lineman's King Large. That's what
awesome.
You want. Yeah. Another offensive lineman, Haynes Hammer.
Wow.
That's what I want for my. And then one of the defensive linemen's name is Gentle Hunt. I don't know that Gentle is what I want in my defensive lineman.
Perfect.
Yeah. A defensive back named Dude Person.
Yeah, I've heard of that one.
A defensive back named Mo, M-O-H, Ability.
Yep.
Mobility. Ghost Rouser. And then Deed Capper is the long snapper. Deed Capper, the long snapper. So, anyway.
That should be his Instagram name or something.
I'm not sure if all of these guys are like, is that their name or is that their nickname that became like their name, or whatever. But
I don't know.
But I'm looking at the comments, and the first comment that pops up is, "Where's General Booty?"
Yep.
So there you go.
Yep. Yeah, he's a legend for sure.
Anyway.
The greatest first name, and unfortunate for the last name, but it worked out.
Yeah.
Works out for him. Oh, well, football was the upside of my weekend. Hopefully I'll last through this, but because I've gotten what everybody has been getting around here. So the cough and all that. So today's probably really is the first day that I have felt pretty good. So I don't have all the other stuff, but still have a little bit of a cough. So for those who are listening in and you hear a cough in the background, that's just me leaning away. But it is definitely a lot better than it has been. So it's always good to get over being sick. I don't get sick very much, but whenever I do, man, it kind of knocks me down. So it's only once or twice a year, if that. But
well, just keep that over in Oklahoma.
Yep. I will do my best. I will do my best. Oh, well, Corey, we have I'm really excited about this season. It's hard to believe we're on season 3. I think, last year I said that. I still remember when you and I were, years ago talking about, hey, we should do a podcast. I remember calling you, hey, what do you think about this? Yeah, let's do this. And now we're on season 3 of the Untied Podcast on our own Excel Pod network. And so it's really cool how things have worked out. And there's a lot of stuff going on with Excel still more, and some really cool stuff that we'll probably be talking about and announcing throughout this season, and some different ads that will be running through to the podcast that you can hear if you're tuning in to us. But I'm excited about this year. I know that we'll both miss Tyler, but looking forward to having him back, and certainly praying for him and Natalie, and hoping everything will go well for the rest of the pregnancy, and whenever that new addition gets here. And so we're really excited for him and for them, and so we'll look forward to having him back. But you and I are going to have a lot of fun this year, or this season, and we're going to be talking about something pretty good, which is in the Psalms. And so we're going to spend the whole season in the Psalms, really looking at David in the Psalms, and we've got a number of things we're going to talk about. So, this is going to be really good. Right off the top, Corey, you teach Psalms. You spend a lot of time in the Psalms. Which Psalm, if you had a favorite one, which Psalm would you say is your favorite?
Well, like a lot of times when you ask somebody, a preacher, what's your favorite book of the Bible? It's whichever one I'm studying at that time. Yeah. Psalm 8 is the one I usually say, because Psalm 8 is written from the perspective of a country boy raised on a farm, at least my view of it.
Yeah.
And I can kind of understand that perspective a little bit. But, you've got David talking about, he's praising God about how majestic he is. And he says that in the first and the last verse of this. But he talks about how, as great as God is in the smallest things, the birth of a baby, how many, in that world at that time, they didn't go to the hospital to have babies. How many family members had he seen, and even more than that, how many baby lambs had he seen born? How many, on the farm, that kind of thing. Yeah. Every time, especially, I know you'll agree with this, when you watch your own child being born, there's a sense of awe and what God has done here is just remarkable. And then the biggest things, I imagine him sitting out like I did when we were growing up. We'd go camping, me and my brother, my cousin, and we'd go camping, and we'd lay around the campfire at night and looking up at the stars. And, when you live out in the country, I hate to brag, but I live out in the country. But when you live out in the country, you can see so many stars at night and on a clear night, and how David's looking up at them just like I've done as a boy, looking up at those stars and just can't even grasp how big the cosmos is that God spoke into existence,
right.
And then with all of that, he says, what am I? That when you think about how majestic and how powerful God is, who am I? What am I? That you would even think of me, much less put me in such an awesome position that I don't deserve as being, the centerpiece of your creation. And anyway, he goes on to talk about that. And of course, then the Hebrews writer is going to expand on that and give it a fuller meaning, of course, in Jesus. But one of our sister podcasts, we spent some time studying. I can't remember if that was Nate or if Matthew Hyatt was on there with Austin McCrickard and I, but we went through Hebrews' use of Psalm 8 and really broke that down. But that's my favorite psalm, probably. It's kind of a simple one, but I think that's what makes the Psalms so wonderful. And there's some depth there, but they're also, it's kind of. I read some at some point about the Gospel of John that it's shallow enough that anybody can wade in it, and it's deep enough that an elephant can drown in it. Well, that's kind of like the Psalms. It's it's the kind of reading that you can just sit under a shade tree and just read it and appreciate the beauty of the Psalms and the message of the Psalms. But the deeper you dive into it, even more so what it's going to mean to you.
Yeah.
So what's your favorite?
Well, I was thinking about that. Psalm 8 really is a great psalm. After going through a deep dive in Hebrews, I'm kind of like you. It's hard to say which one is your favorite, except for the one that you're actually in. But I'll tell you that after going through and especially right off the bat, and I've probably spent more time looking at this over the past several months, really the past year, than any other psalm it's really the first two chapters. Mm-hmm. And that's because in Hebrews chapter 1, you have a whole, kind of defining of who the anointed is, the Son is, and how that intertwines all over the place. And so, the big emphasis on both those chapters, one is, discussing the importance of, the Word and how it should apply to you and all of that. And then two is discussing, the King and to understand the great depth of who the psalmist is actually talking about, and how that has applied throughout the years. And this is probably why I say these two right now would be, kind of more my favorite right now because I'm in them, is because the depth of that has opened up so many things for me in understanding, kind of these dual meaning passages. Some might call them dual fulfillment, dual meaning. I mean, there's a lot of different things there, but to understand God's anointed and how He has seen and discussed them and how He feels about them and the I don't know if I want to say power, but the maybe it is power, rule, authority that He gives them. But at the same time, kind of stepping outside the Psalms, at the same time, when you look at the book of Proverbs, you really kind of see even Solomon's understanding at that point of how he understood his authority and to understand his place, within that chair, if you will. And so the amount of emphasis that he places on those two things, right off the top, you're like, okay, well, we're going more of a doctrinal way of this. Well, that might be true, but for me, being able to understand that in a more in-depth way and to dive more deeper in that, it makes so much more sense when you study Hebrews, when you look at passages and when Peter's writing, when you look at, when you're looking at Mount of Transfiguration, the baptism of Jesus, there's passages in Isaiah, there's all kinds of stuff that is laid out. And so Psalm 1 and 2 kind of connect themselves all over the work of the Bible. And so that's kind of been where I have been in kind of connecting those things and meditating on them, Psalm 1 and verse 2 and So that's kind of what I've spent my time more than anything on over the past probably 6 or 8 months. And so those two is what I've been in. And so they're probably more of my favorite. I love Psalm 51. That's probably the conversation from 2 Samuel 12 when David, recognizes his wrongdoing. And so that those words are just incredible. Sorrow, the repentant heart, after the realization of what he's done, Psalm 119, I don't know if you can leave that out, but Psalm 1 and 2 is where I've been. And I think once you open those two doors, I think you're the one who taught me that analogy, the doors that open up everything. Man, the depth of those two chapters or those two Psalms are just incredible.
Yeah, and one of the things to think about with the book of Psalms is they're not written chronologically, of course. They were arranged in a certain way. You think about like our psalm books. I've got one right up here. Our psalm books are arranged like the praise for the Lord that we use. I don't know about y'all. The praise for the Lord psalm book is basically arranged in alphabetical order.
Yeah.
Because of the length of some, they have to get them a little bit out. But why do it in alphabetical order? Well, that's a convenient way of laying it out, I guess. The Psalms were laid out in a different way, and one of the things that in my study of the Psalms that I've come to appreciate more and more was that it wasn't just I think it's funny that we talk about God and his power and his knowledge, and that he's not the author of chaos, and that everything he does, there's purpose. And then we say, but when it comes to the book of Psalms, he just kind of had them randomly thrown in there.
Yeah.
He guided the writing, but he didn't guide the putting them together. Well, I don't really buy that. And the more that I study them to see like the flow of the Psalms as you go through them. But I think that's the start is, 1 and 2 was put there but as this, if you don't have respect for the Word of God, and if you don't have respect for the anointed of God, then you're never going to be in a position to really lean on God or turn to God like the psalmist does, at least.
Yeah. And, we've kind of had this discussion before, but this season is we're going to be exploring kind of the David throughout the Psalms. And so there's a number of writers that we know of. There's a lot of them that we don't know. There's a lot of Psalms we don't know who wrote those, and we'll cover those probably here shortly. But the overall theme, as we look at David within the Psalms is, we're kind of exploring David through the Psalms, but it's the idea of the blessed man. And so, Psalm 1 and verse 1, how blessed is the man that does not walk in the counsel of the wicked, nor stand in the path of sinners, nor sit in the seat of scoffers, but his delight is in the law of the Lord, and he meditates on it day and night. And so this whole idea of how one can be blessed, is so awesome. And that's kind of, in a way, our theme for this year is looking at, how blessed that one is in every situation with God. And so looking at David throughout his life, there's some pretty lonely moments that he has. In fact, I was looking just a minute ago. Let me see if I can find it. Psalm 13, David is writing, "How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me?" This is a very lonely moment. But still, even though he feels that God may not be there, God is still there. And so he is still talking to God even in his moments of loneliness. Well, you may not feel very blessed, but there are still blessings in those moments. And we'll be exploring those as we go throughout looking at the Psalms and David in the Psalms, because God really does bless the righteous. And he blesses those who seek him. And maybe that's the better way to say that is God will bless those who are seeking him in their life. And I think that we'll find that within the Psalms of David. Very gifted writer. I know sometimes we talk about David or some of these other Bible, quote unquote characters, as we call them. We kind of see them in a different light, but David was just like us, and he had real emotions like we have, but he was such a gifted writer, an inspired writer, but very gifted and very in tune with his spirituality, very in tune with his heart, very in tune with his feelings. And so I think there's a lot that we can learn from him.
Yeah, and that idea of blessed, if you look there in chapter 1 and verse 1, obviously is where it begins with, blessed is the man who walks not. And then if you jump down to the end of chapter 2, yep, it's almost like it's a bookends for the two Psalms. But blessed are all who take refuge in him. And then if you flip over to chapter 32, Psalm 32, he kind of helps define what that idea of, like, we think of blessed as getting, something or whatever, but the idea behind this word in the original language, and really the Greek equivalent in the New Testament, like with the Beatitudes, is happiness is what you'll hear people say a lot of times, but that's kind of a shallow interpretation of it. It's really someone who is God approved. And over in chapter 32, verses 1 and 2, he says, blessed is the one whose transgression is forgiven. So the one that's God approved is the one whose sin is forgiven. Blessed is the man whom the Lord counts no iniquity, and in whose spirit there is no deceit. So it's someone who is handling his sins and his activities in a God-approved way. And then you flip over to chapter 40. In Psalm 40 and verse 4, he defines it this way: blessed is the man who makes the Lord his trust, who doesn't turn to the proud, who don't go after a lie and all that, but who's putting their trust in the Lord. So, this is someone, again, it's a God-approved person, but it's someone who's handling his sin in the right way. It's someone who's trusting in the Lord. Well, that goes right back to what we're saying is the theme of Psalm 1 and 2, that are these doors you've got to get right in order to understand the book. Is if you have the right kind of view about the Word of God, you have the right kind of view of the anointed of God, then you're going to recognize sin is what separates me, and sin is defined by God's Word. Repentance is defined by God's Word. Righteousness is defined by God's Word. And I want that relationship with Him. I want to follow His anointed, so I'm going to do what He says in order to get there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love how you pointed those out and defined that for us. I think that'll be a great help for those who are tuning in and watching us or listening to us in any way. But, every one of us, every person should have a great desire to be blessed by God. We really should. And there's a lot of different blessings that we'll, probably note, during our time in studying this, but there are a lot of blessings, right? Blessed people are receiving the blessings of God. And part of that idea is understanding what those blessings are. The blessing of forgiveness. That's a blessing. The blessing of His presence in your life, the blessing of His protection, His leadership. Being a follower of God is having that great deal of trust, like you noted over in chapter 40 and in verse 4. So the reality is that what we're going to find, and we'll spend more time developing this, is that there is nothing more important than the relationship that we have with God. There's nothing more important than that, because there's so many trials that we'll face. There are a lot of, bad decisions, bad relationships, physical struggles, sickness. There's all kinds of stuff that we're going to face, and the presence of God in our life and looking and following Him, it really is the thing that's going to help us to get through in a time of strength. And I think, again, there's so many examples that we can step outside of the book of Psalms to consider. But even in staying in, what we call wisdom literature, if you look at the book of Job, and Corey, I know that is another one that is one of your favorite books to study and to teach and to consider. But when we look at the book of Job, the thing that I have heard for so long is that, well, Job is talking about suffering, and we're looking for why good people have such a bad time, or why do good people suffer, and there's 100 ways to say that. But after studying Job, and really over the last 2 years, I don't see the book like that really at all like that anymore. It's not that I don't see the suffering in there. I certainly do that. But what I'm seeing within Job is that Job is going through a terrible time, and the only thing that he is really concerned about, even with all the stuff he's going through, is his relationship with the Lord. Mm-hmm. And I think that we see that within the writings of David, really within all the Psalms. But, I really love what Dan Winkler said one time. I don't remember where I heard this, and maybe I've quoted this on here before, but Dan Winkler at one point said, the Psalms are about three things: problems, pray about them, and praise God for his involvement in your life. And I thought that was just so powerful whenever he said that, because it's a recognition that no matter what you're going through, we really do need to seek God's counsel in our life, and, concentrate on following him throughout the good and bad times of our life, because his presence really does mean something for all of us.
Yeah. And, basically there's two main types of Psalms: lament and praise. At the beginning of the book of Psalms, there's a lot of lament, a little bit of praise. By the time you get to the end of the book, a little bit of lament, a lot of praise. But it's not, you're right. It's not just the suffering. It's kind of like the other illustration I always use with Psalms is, and some that are listening to this probably won't remember when smartphones first came out and they were trying to convince everybody to buy them, and they would have commercials. There's an app for that. Whatever it is that you are doing or need to do or whatever, there's an app for that. You need a bookkeeping device. Well, there's an app for that. You need a level. There's an app for that, whatever. And there's a psalm for that, whatever you're going through, good or bad on the spectrum. But it's all about relationship with God. In the hard times, I want to turn to God and trust in him. In the good times, I want to turn to God and praise him. And, sometimes our suffering is the excuse we'll use or whatever that pushes us away from our relationship with God, because we'll blame God or whatever. But also, a lot of times it's our good times that we go through, maybe even more so. When things are going well, we forget about our relationship with God and how important that is. And to remember that not only do we turn to God in times of suffering, but that we also turn to him to praise him in good times. I mean, there's a reason why of the ones that we know who wrote them, David wrote the most. He's the man after God's own heart.
Yeah.
There's a reason that, I think probably a lot of them that we don't know who wrote was probably David as well. But there's a reason why, as far as we know, Saul never wrote a psalm, because Saul was focused more on himself than he was on his relationship with God. And so I think you're right in that it's all about, these are men of God, all of these writers. Some we know more about than others, but these are all men of God, and they're struggling with things, good and bad. So like in Psalm 73, you've got Asaph and the same kind of issues as in the book of Job, the righteous having suffering and the wicked having blessing, and it's confusing him. But then he goes to the house of the Lord and he understands it better. The last 5 Psalms in the book of Psalms is, there's all of these reasons we look around the beauty of creation and everything that we have, there's lots of reasons to sometimes get lost in the fact that we have that because of God. But the psalmist doesn't. He recognizes. And so good, bad, there's psalms for sickness, and there's psalms for defeat, and there's psalms when your friends turn against you, and there's psalms when you feel alone, and there's psalms when you're dealing with death, and all these different things, the real emotions that we go through. Psalms is one of the most real books that there is, practical books, and we sometimes, I think we miss that because we pick a verse out of a psalm rather than take the psalm as its whole. We try to, I think, sometimes get too technical with them rather than, like I said, just sitting under a shade tree and reading them and letting them help us grow. And, even praying those prayers, rewriting them in our own words and praying those prayers ourselves when we're going through things. But
yeah. Talking about, with some of the things that you said, it is kind of, more of the introduction kind of thing. Psalms probably is the most familiar or popular book of the Bible. And maybe you can make an argument for some others, possibly, Genesis, be very, popular if you're talking about, what maybe talked about the most or what people recognize the most, in the New Testament, John, would be a very popular, there's a lot of them that are, right? Philippians, a lot of people, look at certain verses in Philippians and they put that on everything. But Psalms really is probably the most popular that everybody would recognize or know or understand. But whenever you're kind of breaking down the Psalms, we've talked about the blessed man and how God's involved in your life and how we need to seek God. Well, when we look at, for those maybe tuning in for the first time, we sometimes we talk about key words. And keywords are just simply words that are used a lot. They're used, significantly more than any of the other words within a chapter or book, whatever. So as we look at the Psalms, there is a few things that really kind of stand out. And the number one thing that stands out as far as something that's mentioned more than anything is the word or name God. God is mentioned 4,563 times. So
that's counting pronouns and everything. But yeah.
So if you're wondering what the Psalms are about, that pretty much narrows it down. That this really is about it. It really is about God. There are a number of other things that that are discussed. You have the idea of enemies. That's almost 650 times. It's the wicked person, 459. The righteous person, 417. And we're not getting too far in the weeds on all these key words that are here, but by far, God is mentioned more times than any of those, and so. I think that's pretty telling about the book itself and how it can help you. And when you look at the writers themselves, their love toward God, their understanding of God, the way they look at God, it really is something to consider. So, and I've told people this. I've taught class, and I've said this in class. I've done lessons on the Psalms. In fact, I did 2 of them this summer that were both kind of an introduction or a journey through the Psalms. And I believe that this is important for people to know. And Corey, I think that you would agree with this. When we look at the Psalms, we look at it, unfortunately, like and you kind of alluded to this earlier, as one solid writing. like the book of Matthew. And all of a sudden we see that there are, a vast, there's a huge difference in chapters, between Psalms and Matthew. And so when we look at this large number of Psalms and we think, oh my goodness, this is going to take forever for me to read. Well, one of the most important things that I have learned about the Psalms, and Corey, you're the one who taught me this, is the Psalms are not designed or meant for you to just read through. They're meant for you to take your time in. And as you said earlier, the Psalms are not in chronological order. They're not, while some Psalms will go together, and some could possibly be a part one or part two, or maybe they're one Psalm and they're kind of separated. Those are things that we'll probably talk about, but they're not meant to be that way. They're meant to be individual songs, individual writings that are meant and designed for you to consider the overall message. And so, as we go throughout this season, our hope is that you will consider that idea that whenever you're going through the Psalms, pick one Psalm and spend time in it. Whether it's a week, a month, spend time in that one Psalm. Don't worry about the other ones. Just spend time there and consider what it's saying and how it, the application of it and what it means, and just go through it over and over. That is how the Psalms are actually designed. And Corey, you may have a better way of saying that, but how they're designed for us to, kind of the intake of Scripture here, for us to be meditating on the things that is being said, especially when you consider that God is a huge part of this message, and we need to, have a good mindset about that.
Yeah, and what you were talking about a while ago about God being mentioned over 4,500 times, in relation to that, the psalmist is mentioned over 2,000 times.
Yeah.
So that's what it's really all about, is a relationship between someone who trusts in God and the Lord, okay? All these different things. That's the big picture message. But each one of these psalms is its own work, and it would be kind of like, we're going to sing the first verse of song number 222, and then we're going to sing the chorus of 287, and then we're going to, we would never do that with our song book, but that's the way that we do with their song book, their prayer book. But the way I've always illustrated it is like you've seen these pictures, and I used to know what the word for them was, but I can't think of it right now. But it's like a picture made up of a bunch of pictures. So like if you're standing back, mosaic. If you're standing back, 15 feet from it, you see a picture maybe of Garrett Bernethy. Okay. And then as you walk up, you realize that it's made up of all these little squares, and one of those pictures might be a picture of Garrett Bernethy in the pulpit preaching. And one of those might be hugging his wife. And one might be him sitting in a deer stand. And one might be standing at a grill. And one might be... So all of these little pictures are little snippets of the big picture of who Garrett Bernethy is. But each picture is its own... Well, that's the Psalms. There's this big picture of the relationship between God and the psalmist, and each one of these is a little picture of the, in a particular circumstance. So when dealing with suffering, or when dealing with anger, or when dealing with victory, or when dealing, whatever, in that moment, how do I grow in my relationship with God? And that's what the big picture is all about. But each of these individual psalms are meant to be studied individually on their own, in their own context, in that way.
Yeah. And that, for me, I love the idea of shrinking something down. A lot of people, just with the Bible itself, it's a massive work. And to be able to shrink it down, that helps me from a mental standpoint. I've said before, I'm not a guy who's gonna sit, all the time and just read. I don't go to the coffee shop and read. I'm really not a reader. And so when I see a huge work whether it's the Bible or, I don't know, some of those huge books that are out there. I'm looking at that, and it might have a great title, might have a great cover, but I'm looking at size going, yeah, that's not for me. So when I look at the whole, there's 150 Psalms, I'm going, man, that's a lot. But when I'm able to shrink it down and understand, how it's put together, now all of a sudden it's not so intimidating anymore. And there's actually, if you're talking, there's what's considered 5 books in the Psalms. And those are broke down, book 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and we can put those in the show notes. But, that's kind of how it's broken down. You actually see that in your Bible. It'll actually have book 1, 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth. And so when you understand, kind of the breakdown of that shrinks it down some. There's 5 books. Okay, well, I can concentrate on 1 book or 2 book or whatever. But then understanding that every single psalm, really is a single song. Well, that gives me a bite-sized chunk that I can consider for whatever amount of time. And, for me at least, that really is a great help. And I would assume that probably there are a lot more people out there that are like that.
Yeah, not only just in Bible study, but even in preaching and teaching.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's hard to know where to stop and start, and we sometimes will talk about, this is a bad chapter break or whatever. Well, sometimes we'll point out the fact that, now remember, the chapter breaks aren't inspired, so don't lose the thought. Well,
right.
Here they are, because it's really a collection of 150. Now, like you said, there's a few exceptions to that, like Psalm 42 and 43, but the chorus that's repeated will help you to see that. But anyway, they're all their own kind of deal, and so I think that's where it helps us, but it also kind of frames the discussion or the mindset that we're taking into it is that I know I'm not trying, and Psalms is a big book. If you count the original words, it's the 3rd biggest book in the Old Testament. It's got, depending on how you count them, it's got more, sometimes people will count allusions to a text at, instead of quotations, whatever. But it depends on how you count it. Every list you'll see is either Isaiah 1, Psalms 2, or Psalms 1, Isaiah 2, in the number of times that it's quoted or alluded to or whatever in the New Testament. So, it's an important book for a lot of reasons. And again, I think we think it's a big old book. How do I get my mind wrapped all? Well, you start with Psalm 1, and then you go to Psalm 2, and then you go, that helps a lot. I think to just put it in some context for us that way.
Yeah, and Corey, these are actually, I believe, from you, but to study the Psalms, here's 3 points that might help a person if they're studying through the Psalms. Number 1 is don't be in a hurry. Don't be in a hurry too. And Psalm 1 and verse 2 talks about, and he meditates day and night. Well, the idea of meditation, or as Corey has defined it for me, and it is stuck in my mind, it makes so much sense, chewing on the cud, just chewing on it, that really is how these are meant to be studied. And so take your time. Don't be in a hurry. Secondly, keep in mind that there is a historical context that's going on. This is talking about Israel's history, the things that they're going through at that time. I recently had a conversation with a good brother over Psalm chapter 2 and verse 7. We had mentioned it in class as we were studying a few other things and talking about the anointed. And he had just gotten out of listening to a sermon about how that was about Jesus and all that stuff. And one of the things that me and him talked about was the consideration that nobody knew about Jesus whenever Psalm 2 was written. So while it is alluded to, and it does have a meaning of Jesus according to Hebrews chapter 1, who is the anointed that they're discussing. So there's a historical context around that. We mentioned Psalm 51 going back to 2 Samuel 12 during the time when David was, called out for his sin. So we're going to find a lot of that within the Psalms that we covered during this season, of actually what's going on within David's life. And so we have to keep that in mind. And then 3 is the understanding that we're not reading history necessarily, although we are looking about historical context, but we're reading about, we're reading poetry. And so we really need to look to that, the certain type of, style or flavor of the poetry that's being written. And then, all of that needs to be considered whenever we're going through each of the Psalms as we do that throughout the season. And of course, we hope that, those who are listening and tuning in, watching, that you will take some time on your own outside of where we discuss these things to study these Psalms on your own. I can say this for myself, that I have appreciated the Psalms more and more as I've grown older and gone through things and studied them more and taken classes on them and taught through them over the period of the last 5 to 10 years, that there really is a huge deal of what am I trying to say? You will receive great blessings in your life of understanding, what the Psalms are about and how they can help you. You truly will be blessed by them, and they can help you through some really, great times of struggle.
Yeah. And I think what you brought out, one of those things is really important about it being poetry. About 40% of the Old Testament is poetic, So it's important for us to understand not only what we normally call those 5 books of poetry, but, Lamentations and so much of Isaiah and different places, that there's lots of poetry in the Old Testament. Well, poetry, you've got to give it some poetic license and exaggeration at some point. So, again, I don't know that this is where we need to go to make our theological arguments, not to say that it's not biblically sound, but you have to understand that some of the things that are written in poetry it's not like when Paul was writing the letter that we call Ephesians, he's writing a doctrinal dissertation about the church, what God has done for us and what we ought to do for him in return, That's not what David is doing when he sat down and wrote Psalm 22 or Psalm 51. He's writing about the way he feels. Yeah. And so sometimes it will be, it's true because it is the way he feels, and it's the way that we feel sometimes. Why have you turned your ears from me? Why will you not listen to my prayer? Well, has God really forgotten about David? No, God can't forget because he's God. Has God not listened to David? Is he unaware of David's circumstances? Of course, none of those things are true, but that's the way that he feels. Mm-hmm. And we've got to understand that everything that is written in the Bible, and understand what I'm saying here when I say this, everything that's written in the Bible is not true. What Satan said to Eve was not true.
Right.
What he said to Jesus was not true. Some of the things that the friends said to Job was maybe true in certain contexts, but the application they were making of it was not true. Right. Some of the things that is said isn't true, but it's the way they fit. So like in Psalm 22, David begins, he's at some point in his life, he's feeling surrounded, and he begins Psalm 22, my God, why have you forsaken me? Yeah. And I believe that Jesus was feeling the same way, and there's lots of parallels from Psalm 22 to Jesus's that's seen on Calvary, but I believe that's what he was feeling, which is why he said, my God, why have you forsaken me? Hey, God really forsaken Jesus? Well, of course not. There's a whole lot of theological problems with God the Father forsaking God the Son and all that. But that's the way David felt. That's the way Jesus felt. A lot of the people that are listening to this, you and I, have at times, we either have felt like God forgot all about us, or probably at some point in our life, we will forget like God forgot all about us. So how do we handle that emotion? Well, you go to Psalm 22 and you see how David works through that. And then by the end of the Psalm, he says, but I know you've always taken care of me, and I know you're going to now. And when you do, I'm going to praise your name to everyone, and everybody's going to know what a great God you are, Yeah. Well, that's being honest with God. Like some of the prayers that David is going to pray in the Psalms, if we were there, we would move over to the side because we wouldn't want the lightning to hit us when it struck him, But God is evidently okay with that. Very similar to the prayers that Job prayed in the book of Job. And at the end of it, God said the three friends sinned, Job didn't. Came to some wrong conclusions, but God's okay with that. And that's what he wants us to do when we deal with good times or bad or anywhere in between, is go to him to try to work through those things.
Yeah. So this is, the Psalms help us to understand the journey of life in a lot of ways, and the relationship between the blessed man and God. And I think that's important, and that's why it's so applicable to everyday life, is that it really does give you the everyday scenario that we face. Now, are we all going to be hiding in a cave, from the king as he's trying to kill us? Maybe not. But, are there horrible circumstances that a person may face in their life where it seems like everybody's against you? Sure. There's a lot of these things that we can connect with, and we can read about these things. And like you said, figure out, how did David get through this? Because, so many people have that question. How am I going to get through today with the issues I'm facing? And it feels like the whole world is over. And, you've been there, I've been there, a lot of people have been there. And so reading through, these Psalms can help us to figure out, listen, life really is, every day is what it is. And tomorrow we're going to have something different. And so we've got to make it through today. Well, what's the best way that I can make it through the day? Well, the best thing that I can do right now is go to God. I feel like he's forgotten me. I'm still going to go to him. I feel unbelievably hurt. I'm still going to go to him. And so these are real life scenarios that are written in this way that can connect with our emotions to help us to rationalize and move forward with the reality of life and our situation, and understand that God truly is in control of everything. And we need to lean on him for understanding. We need to lean on him when we're hurt. We need to lean on him when things just seem, detrimental in our life, and really put our trust in him. Yeah. And that is, the Psalms help us on this journey of life as we strive to lean on our faith toward him. And like you alluded to, Jesus understood that. Jesus mentioned, he mentioned in the Psalms, Luke 24:44, the Psalms are about him. He's quoting the Psalm on Calvary. He recognizes that stuff. And to show the humanity of David, God's anointed king, and even the humanity of Jesus, God's anointed king, and how they both relied on God, as men, I think that's a big deal. And it really can help us to get through a lot of different situations in life, and help us have the proper, put things in their proper place, if you will. Yeah. So,
yeah, good and bad.
Yeah.
You look at places like Luke 6 and Matthew 14, places where Jesus, God the Son, goes up on the mountain to pray. Well, if there's times that God the Son needed to be alone to communicate with God the Father, you can bet your bottom dollar there's times that Corey, the imperfect son, needs to spend time with God the Father. And good and bad, whatever, like so, a lot of times in our preaching and teaching, our application becomes you need to pray, you need to study. Well, what? Well, the Psalms is a great thing to teach people to pray and to study, to read.
Yeah.
Because, like I know and you know that when we're going through a hard time or when we're going through a good time or we're going through a troubling time or we're going through a decision time or whatever, we need to pray. But there's been a lot of times in my life I've known I need to pray. And I hit my knees and I bow my head and I close my eyes and I clasp my hands and my mouth comes open and nothing comes out because I don't know what to pray.
Right.
And the Psalms help us with that because David's going through the same things that we're going through. Different setting, different time, but same emotions that we're going through. And we can pray those prayers and we can see how that as he's praying those prayers, his mindset changed about certain things. Even the darkest of laments, singing the blues, ends in praise and trust. And it's because of that turning to God. So, we see what David does when Nathan comes to him after sinning with Bathsheba and says, "You the man."
Mm-hmm.
But what was he thinking? Well, Psalm 51 tells us what he was thinking, and how he processed that emotionally and mentally and spiritually that allowed those good and bad times not to drive him further from God, but pull him closer to him.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, maybe we can talk about this more later, but, Romans 8 is such a powerful place that helps us to understand God's role, if you will, in prayer, and how He has created, this communication for us, right? And how Father, Son, Spirit all work together in a way, and the Holy Spirit's there. He's understanding your heart, your mind, and so the basic idea of what he's saying there in 23 through 26 is that the things that you can't figure out how to say, he's gonna basically read your mind and tell God what it is, right? The things that you can't get out. However, the Psalms, while that might be true, the Psalms are showing us that we cannot use Romans 8 and what we learn from that as an excuse to not pray or to, not try to say anything. God has a great desire to know what's on your mind and what's on your heart. And we could say, well, He knows that. Well, of course He knows that. However, just because you know something doesn't mean you don't want them to tell you it.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we're going to find in these prayers that we'll look at as well, is that we really are, as you go through the Psalms, you're learning how to pray. You're learning how to express your feelings. You're learning how to express the things you're going through. And so prayer is, I think what we learned from this and elsewhere is that prayer is not easy. And prayer is something you have to work at. You have to work at it. You have to put some, initiative behind it. There's got to be purpose. There's got to be some intention behind the prayer. And I think that the more you pray, the better you'll be able to pray. And I don't mean, I'm not meaning, what words to use and how to use those words and, all that kind of stuff. That's out the door. But what I mean is working on your ability to be able to share what you need to share with God and being open enough and trusting enough that what you need to share with God, you're able to share with God. And so, when you mentioned, we probably wouldn't want to be around with something he said for lightning come down and strike him. If we've said it before on this show, if you're upset, you're frustrated, you're mad, you're sad, you're happy, give it to him and let him have what you need to say. He's got, lack of a better way to say this, he's got big shoulders. He can take what you need to say. He wants you to say it. And that really is the growth of that relationship. And so while we're taking this huge journey of understanding what the blessed man looks like, being God approved, this also does help us to learn more about our prayer life and how we can grow in that prayer life. Because the better your relationship is with God, the better your prayer life is going to be with God. And that's something that we can, that we can focus on more.
Yeah. And the fact that God does want us to tell him, even though he knows, but also understanding that prayer is not about informing him as much as it is for our sake. Mm-hmm. And so, again, you look and see how that while David is praying those brutally honest prayers, how that just talking through that kind of helps him to come to a better conclusion, a better outlook, those kinds of things. And as we go through that, grow in our prayer life, our learning to be honest with God and not just saying the canned prayers of God, Garden Direct or whatever, but really in our individual prayers, being honest with God, it's for our good to help us to understand that there is someone that we can always talk to, and that's him, and help us work through the things that would trouble us, to keep us focused on him and actually grow in our relationship by the end of it.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to the rest of our study throughout this season of the Psalms and looking at these, and I hope if you're tuning in that you prepare yourself for the following week. And so next week we're going to be looking at Psalms 1 and 2, and we're gonna study those two Psalms and talk about them and consider how they can impact us in our life. So we encourage all of our listeners or those who are viewing this to read through those two Psalms as we get ready for next week. And of course, we remind you that every Thursday at noon is when every episode comes out for us, and you can check us out or tune in on any of the major podcasting platforms. You can go to our website, excelstibor.net, go to the Excel Pod, and check us out there. We've got a little bit of a website change. We've done a few things there, and so it might look a little bit different. Still in the process of getting that done, but you can catch us anywhere on there. We'll put all this stuff in the show notes so that you can stay closely connected to what we're doing as we go in through our study of this. So, Corey, I'm excited about this. There's been a lot that we've covered today, and excited to go on this journey with you and discuss all these different Psalms and looking at David. I know that I'm going to grow a lot from this, and hopefully all of our listeners will as well. So, anything that you want to leave us with before we close this season 3, episode 1 out?
No. Well, one of the things that it's kind of a pet peeve of mine. You said it right. Psalms 1 and 2. It's the book of Psalms, but it's individual psalm, an individual psalm. So it's Psalm 23, not Psalms 23. So we'll try to do good about that, but we want you to as well. So, anyway,
doing away with the plural. That's what we're doing here.
That's right. We wouldn't say open up your songbook to Songs 892.
I'm going to start doing that and see if anybody will point out that.
Oh, me.
I'm going to make every book plural. Turn over to Matthew's chapter 12.
Matthew chapters 17.
Chapters 17 verses. See if anybody says anything. They're going to be like, that poor guy.
Bless his heart.
Bless his heart. He never went to school, did he?
Yeah.
Yeah. Would probably be corrected pretty good. Some people are, they're all about the grammar and stuff.
Yeah.
The message of the sermon, questionable if they get that. But
that's right.
There's something wrong in that PowerPoint, buddy. Anyway, I digress. Oh man. Well, I'm excited about this season. I'm so glad to be back. And I'm just, this is going to be a great time together, a great study. And we're glad that all of you who are listening and tuning in whatever way that you've joined us for our first episode back in this season 3. Again, we're excited about this. We hope that you are. Please like, follow, share, and subscribe to our podcast. It helps us to grow in a lot of ways. And the more that we're able to have, the more likes and all that stuff, it just helps the podcast to get out there even more. And so we hope that if you deem this podcast worthy, that you will do that. Share it with your congregations, your friends, your family, to help us to grow and go into study with more and more people as we do this. And so I'm glad to be back. It's been a great show, but as everything comes to an end. And so we look forward to being back with you next week on Thursday, as we'll air at noon on that day. And so thank you for joining us today. And until next time, we hope that you will continue to be blessed in your walk with the Lord. And we hope that you'll stay untied.